So on the left, that's an LG C1 48-inch with the WBE panel, and on the right is the new LG C2 65-inch. Now it may not seem like a really fair comparison, but the 48-inch C1 is around 700 nits, so it's not too far off of the other sizes. So we're going to start going through a whole bunch of stills and video content, and I'm going to show all the differences that I found between the C1 and the C2. So starting here with this one, just using this to try and check for like sharpness and clarity and detail. When it comes to that kind of stuff, I have seen zero difference. Now I have found some other areas where there definitely is improvement, and we will be getting into those. And this video is about 20 minutes long, but towards the end is just demoing some content. So stick around for a while and you'll see all the differences this year. The C series is LG's most mainstream, popular, and for the most part, best value for their OLED series. So it's very important to LG. The biggest thing that has changed this year is the new Alpha 9 Gen 5 processor, whereas last year we had the Alpha 9 Gen 4. There is a bit of a brightness difference that's not from the processor, that's just a software restriction that's now been lifted. Last year, the C1s could have come with a WBC panel, which was from 2020 or older, or it could have been a 2021 WBE panel, which is what was used in the G1, the A90J, or any of the LGs that had EVO labeling. So this year, they all should be WBE or their new EX, that's an LG display terminology. I'm not expecting that to be in all of them, and on the smaller 48, 42-inch sizes, it does seem that those might not all be WBE either. That said, that out of the way, what differences are we seeing? Well, the first one is smooth gradation. So this setting previously had very minimal effect. Now, there's actually a pretty noticeable effect from it, and if you look very deep into the background here, if I set it to high on the C2, I did have to zoom in here so that you could see it better. But if you look way back under where the sun is, when it's on high, you can actually see like a shadow of additional birds back there that you can't see when it's off or on the C1 at all at any setting. And then as you look through that where the water meets the sky in the background, you can see that difference it makes. Now, another difference that's very noticeable is just the general use of the TV is much faster. You can see how long it takes to go all the way up on the slider and all the way down on the C1 versus the C2. All of your menu controls and movements are far faster this year. Now, something else that I measured a little bit higher color gamut on the C2. I will need to get some more of them or get some information from other people to see how consistent that is, but it is a few percent higher. So the first image there was P3, the second was BT 2020, and the difference is visible in content when they are side by side. So when it comes to the brightness, like I said earlier, my C1 measures just under 700 nits, the C2 measures just under 800. That's in a small window through about 10% or so. Then it declines until it gets to 160 nits full screen. Now the average for the C1 was 130 full screen. So it pretty much brightness-wise performs like a G1. Everything you heard last year as far as the brightness difference between a C1 and a G1 pretty much applies here between the C1 and the C2. Now Fortnite here is an SDR, so this is just showing max SDR game mode brightness between the two. Pretty much the same. No real visible difference there. Now when we move over to HDR, there's a bit of a difference, but there's also something else that some people may not be comfortable with. But if you do go into the service menu and you disable the GSR setting, that will actually allow the games to get a little bit brighter. So I try to show that here. So at the top of the screen, I try to put a cloud there where you can see the little bit of shift in the brightness once you turn off the GSR enable setting. That with it on was a noticeable difference between the C1 and the C2 if the C1 had it off and the C1 had it on, or vice versa. So if you are trying to get a little bit extra brightness out of your games, you can do this. When it comes to warranty or whatever, if you ever have a problem, go back in the service menu. It takes 30 seconds to toggle this, and then you turn it back on. That's up to you. But I just wanted to point out that there is a notable brightness difference if you leave that setting set to enable on. But if you want the little extra brightness, turn it off. And then for the logo detection setting, they're still low and high this year. They operate the same way as last year. It's about a 15 and 30% brightness reduction when it detects logos for around 5 minutes. Now here in Destiny, I originally had it at 700 nits, which was for the C1, and I switched it to 800 just to let the C2 stretch its legs a little bit. Now one thing that is very obvious is the near black is definitely more crushed on the C2 when it's in its HGIG or accurate mode, or if you are in movie mode and you have dynamic tone mapping turned off, there is more being crushed, and that is also very measurable as well. However, if you are someone who is going to use dynamic tone mapping and or the AI Picture Pro setting, that will greatly affect that. And so I did quite a few demos showing that as well. But before I talk more about that, I just want to point out red is very noticeable side by side, how much more red it is with that increase in the gamut. And green is also pretty noticeable as well. Now, dynamic tone mapping on the C1 or in the 2021 models, it would lift all the midtones and shadow regions and make them too bright, and then take away energy from highlights in order to brighten those areas up. So before these models, the 2022 ones, came out, LG, when they announced them, was talking specifically about Dolby Vision IQ with precision. And what that basically meant was they are able to divide the image up into 2,000 zones and then examine each of those zones every frame and adjust luminance where it needs it. So it could darken an area that it felt could be darker and then boost energy more to brighter areas to create a higher perceived contrast and targeting areas for highlights. So if you look closely here at what I'm showing, if you enable dynamic tone mapping and then turn on AI Picture Pro, last year on the C1, the entire image would just shift its luminance. Now if you look closely on the C2, you'll see only certain areas are like kind of warping the luminance so that certain areas are getting brighter and other areas getting darker. It's not just this overall lift of the average picture level across the whole thing. So there's another scene I'll get to in a minute showing that as well. Here is just a quick look at some shadow detail. So you can see with the dynamic tone mapping off, the C1 has more shadow detail, and then when you turn it on, then the C2, the effect of dynamic tone mapping is much greater on the C2. Now, especially in a very dark scene with bright highlights, again, on the C1, you don't really see that much change when you turn it on, but with the C2, the highlights do get a whole lot brighter. So it does really seem that the processor is able to use those 2,000 zones and make these targeted increases in luminance, even not in the Dolby Vision IQ mode. So in this scene, you can see when the dynamic tone mapping goes on, most of the scene does raise its luminance, but also the highlights are getting brighter, so then it makes sense, because if you have a brighter light bulb, then the areas around it that are illuminated by it are going to be brighter as well. Meanwhile, all the darker areas are still staying very dark. They're not raising those areas, which is what you would see typically when you're raising the low mid-range of EOTF. Now, here in a bright scene, again, pretty much this whole scene does get brighter, but it's as if like the sun just got brighter and it's just lighting everything naturally. It's not that over boosted look that you would see, like say on an LCD Samsung or something. that isn't following EOTF. This just looks like it's genuinely just getting brighter. And compared to the C1, it's certain areas got brighter, but it didn't look like the sky got brighter with it. And then when the AI Picture Pro is toggled, again on the C1, you just see the whole image shift its luminance. But on the C2, like if you look at the character's coat, you'll see how the contrast on it seems to improve, and how just certain areas in the image do get brighter, certain areas get darker, and it's not just this universal across the screen, just like luminance change like last year. So now we're going to move into motion. So there is massive improvements in motion. I think this is the biggest upgrade you're going to see going with a C2 or a G2 this year. Motion was certainly the area that LG was weakest behind Sony last year, and they really made strides this year. Is it on par with Sony? Probably. I mean, it depends. Motion is very subjective, and it's different from person to person. But if you look at these patterns here, with all the motion settings off, you get to see what you're supposed to see more clearly with less judder. And then as you start turning on motion smoothing settings, the artifacts on the C1 are just atrocious compared to the C2. Like, it is just a night and day difference here. So if you're someone that's sensitive to either OLED judder or soap opera effect, the C2 is a huge, huge step up over the C1 in the motion. Like, I can't express that enough. The artifacts that you don't see on the C2 but you do on the C1 in this test and the next one are very obvious. You can turn the de-judder up to 6 or 7 before you start seeing similar artifacts that you see on the C1 with de-judder only on 1. Like, that is just a huge difference there. And then again, if you don't like any of the motion settings turned on at all, you're still getting a nice improvement in the judder. So if you've been following me for a while, you may know that when I had the Sony A80J, that it was the first TV that I could turn a motion smoothing setting on at all. So I could use smoothness 1 on the A80J and not see soap opera effect. Well, I can say that on the C2, somewhere around 2 is probably similar to the A80J with the smoothness at 1, 2 on the de-judder here. And then I think most people are going to like a setting of 3 on de-judder, and that's just from comments that I see and read all the time. Now, if you go up to 4, it will start to show a pretty noticeable soap opera effect, but it does do a really good job at cleaning up judder. Once you get to 5, judder is basically gone, but then you are getting soap opera effect. However, artifacts are basically not visible in real content at that point still. So if that's how you like it, you can go up to 5, maybe even 6, and be good. All right, so in the next test, we're going to use the stock ticker one here. Now, pay attention to the scrolling lines at the top of the screen, as well as also how legible the text is. Now, again, as soon as you turn on anything on the C1, that top line of lines, you can see already. It becomes a mess. It looks like the lines are dancing around. All kinds of weird things happens to them. On the C2, you got to turn it up to the de-judder to about 6 or 7 again before it looks on the C2 how it looks on the C1 at a setting of 1. It's just really, like, it's a huge jump. Give LG a big round of applause for finally getting their motion, up there with Sony. Now, again, between this and the smooth gradation now being improved, like, those are 2 areas that they really needed to catch up. They did. And then the other is like sharpness, clarity, detail. Well, as long as you feed a clean, good source, it's going to look the same as the Sony. It's only in lower quality, older, low bit rate, fuzzier, noisier content that LG still needs to improve that area. However, that said, I will spend more time with the noise reduction settings and see if I can see any difference. But so far in the limited testing that I have checked on those, really wasn't seeing anything different than the C1, and that is something that there's just really no way the camera's going to pick up very well at all. So, but I will update in the review if I do find something that shows a difference there. All right, so now I'm going to recap the differences between the C1 and the C2, and then make suggestion as to when and who should buy which or the other, while the Spears and Munzel disc demo plays here. So, first biggest improvement, obviously motion, like that, huge strides made in motion. Second, smooth gradation or reduced banding. I would say that was about a moderate improvement. Now I do need to check in game mode and see if smooth gradation does anything at all, because on the C1 smooth gradation does nothing at all in game mode. So I will be having a very in-depth gaming video coming up soon for the C2 and G2, so I will add that in there. Okay, so you got motion, you got gradation, and then you got processing with the like AI setting and the dynamic tone mapping, anything like that that has to do with processing. Those are quite improved. Brightness, technically, it's improved. Like the capability of the panels is there to get brighter. However, you're not going to see that very much if you set the settings to the accurate settings. It's when you use dynamic tone mapping and AI Picture Pro, things like that, which really lets it use the full capability of the panel. Now, last year, I wouldn't have touched any of it. This year, I probably, me personally, still won't use it because I got questions of its accuracy. However, I'm going to certainly look at it more, and I can see why someone would want to use it, especially if you are in a brighter room and you're trying to overcome that brightness. It's definitely a big improvement over last year in how it's implemented and how it works. It'll also be interesting to see how close that's able to then get to the QN90B when I do that comparison. So keep an eye out for that. Now, the other area that there's a change is with the black frame insertion. So up to this point, I've only tested on the Nintendo Switch, as that's the only device I've ever used it on. On the C1s, you could set to low, medium, high, or auto. And obviously high was the full effect of BFI, and that's where you get like the flicker, the reduced brightness, however you get much improved motion resolution. On the C2, you only have the option of on or off. When you turn it on, it's effectively the same as high last year. Now for the Nintendo Switch, that's fine, and what's interesting is there's no brightness difference. However, the flicker is less bothersome on the C2, so that I would chalk up as an improvement. Now, unrelated to picture quality, other changes are the stand and the weight of the TV. Like the 65-inch is the lightest 65-inch TV I've ever held. With its stand, I think I would say it's probably roughly the same weight as my 48-inch C1. So there's that. But that's pretty much about it. So if you take last year's G1 and its panel capabilities, and you give it this new processing, and you give it this new chassis, new stand, that's pretty much what the C2 is. So is that worth the price increase? Well, right now, when the last year models are getting cleared out pretty much at really good prices, and the C2 is new, so it's at its full MSRP just about, it's kind of hard to justify that price difference. Now, if you're someone really sensitive to the motion, then it's probably worth paying that difference, although you could also look at Sony and get the same or better motion there. However, if you are really into gaming and you want an LG for the gaming and you want the motion, okay, then I can see making that case to pay more for the C2. Also, if you're someone who's going to use the AI features and the dynamic tone mapping and you want that kind of stuff, that's another reason I can see going for the C2. But if you want the more accurate setup, there's really not much visual difference between them. Alright, so we're pretty much now at our conclusion, and if you made it through this whole video, I thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you out and you like the video. Also, I previously had been having audio issues and I got a new mic, so I hope this solved that problem and it sounds better. And I hope to see you all in the next video or the next live stream, and I hope you all have a good one, and I'll catch you later. Thanks.